particularly farmers here are pretty concerned about watching the weather, but questionable when that first snow is going to drop. That there'd be a lot of talk going on about what you can do before that happens. And so there was a question there, we're not expecting you to be a microbiologist, but around the microlife and how the snow insulates that, as compared to, I suppose, there's a lot of bare open land in our conditions in Australia, and we contribute to that by making sure it's bare all summer. That's where a lot of shift's been happening to actually let things grow. When you say you miss out on those crops, they still stay alive under the plants still stay alive under the snow.
If they're biennials or perennials. So an annual crop, oat plant will be, green up to, for the first 60 days. The last 30 days it gets into its reproductive and maturity stage. And when it gets to that stage, that whole root exudate flux changes. And when basically the quick rule of thumb, the research that I've seen is for the first 30 days, the annual plants, your annual cropping plants, will be feeding the soil biology through root exudates. Once it gets past that 30 days, those root exudates change to become more resilient to microbial breakdown. So this way the plant is setting up for the next year's seedlings. Number two, all that carbon going into the ground as root exudate is now needed for fast vertical growth of that annual plant. So in these annual cropping systems, we're feeding them for 30 days, and now we have 335 days where we're really not feeding any soil biology. So by having these biennial plants in where they're vegetative for 120 days, 140 days, whatever that length of vegetative stage is, now we're feeding that soil biology for a longer period of time. So if we do not have that plant growing on the soil, so this give you a little story with this cover crop behind me. So what I've done is the year before I grew soybeans, harvested the soybeans for seed production, and then we got snow, it overwintered. Then in the spring, what I did is I seeded, this is crimson clover, Persian clover, Berseem clover, some Phacelia, some pearl millet, and some perennial ryegrass, which we were planning on growing for seed production. It's a biennial grass, so it will overwinter. So when I'm talking about growing these cover crops, I'm talking about 5 functional plant groups. So we're dealing with our grasses, we're dealing with our legumes, our brassicas, non-brassicas, and forbs. And so this nice little Phacelia plant over here, that's what I check off as being one of our forbs. So I seeded this all together, did not harvest it. This biomass was about mid-thigh high. And people are saying, well, you can't do that because, the perennial ryegrass is only 5 centimeters tall. It's going to need sunlight. And I keep telling them about plant ecology and all this other good stuff. But so what happened was we had this huge biomass growing in the field, lots of legumes. So my goal was to grow the perennial ryegrass without buying any nitrogen fertilizer, which it worked. By doing all of this, what we're doing is we set up all this biomass, we let that rot down onto the surface. The perennial ryegrass grew through all of that biomass, and with no rain, I got the same yield as everybody else that invested 120 units of nitrogen. When we're going through and we have that perennial ryegrass this tall underneath that mat of biomass, it's still alive, it's green. So I have pictures of places where I push the snow back, open up that litter, and you can see the nice rows of the perennial ryegrass. When that perennial ryegrass was still this high, it's still slowly leaking out. It's like a diesel engine. So it's slowly leaking out those root exudates into the soil to feed that soil biology. The rest of this biomass that died, the only way it would feed the soil biology is if there was moisture and it was starting to rot from the process from the bottom down. But because we didn't have, the ground starts freezing up, that soil biology activity really starts dropping. When we have that green plant growing, we're still, instead of being down here, maybe we're here, we're not all the way up here yet. So it's still happening. There's still ways of building soil organic matter, capturing carbon and moving ahead. So if I did not have this, so if we went out and we raised this down to nothing, like we should not do, we go out and we do some tillage, which once again, the organic people in the group, how do you control weeds? Well, we need tillage. No, you don't need tillage, but that's another story. So if you blackened it, and once again, driving around WA and I'm seeing way too much tillage, in our scenario, when it freezes, now the frost moves deeper into that soil profile. So it actually slows down even more. So these are the things that we want to do. By having that living root into the soil, it's keeping that soil alive for a longer period of time. The frost doesn't go down as deep. A lot of good things are happening from that. But what percentage of the acres in Western Canada are doing that? Not enough.
Yeah, because the question was, what's the average soil carbon? But that would be according to, different practices.
Yeah, and that's where, in Western Canada will range in the irrigation area and the brown soil zone. So that's, the driest area will be dealing with 0.5% to 1%, 1.5% of organic matter. Mm-hmm. And then when you start moving north, it's a little cooler, a little better, a little less evaporation, a little more moisture. And we can be up into that 15%.
15,
yeah. Mm. And the neat thing is, there's the one dairy that I'm working with in the northern part of Saskatchewan. Basically, when you go north of that, it's trees, rocks, and water. And that is it. There's no one living in the northern half. Well, not very many. The Aboriginals, so there's a few communities for Aboriginals in northern Saskatchewan, but no agriculture whatsoever. So he's on the northern end of the Saskatchewan agricultural area. And we've increased his organic matter by 1% per year for the last 6 years.
That's astounding.
It's great. It's wonderful when people listen.